Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're so happy that you're with us. I'm Cindy Cisagoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Cleveland 2030 District. We've got a great presentation here for you today. I'm going to start to share my screen. I hope you can all see that. And as usual, we thank our partners in the Building Education series. You see all of our partners there. Today, we're partnering with the City of Cleveland to present today's session. So we appreciate Libby Lehman and all the folks at the city who helped us put today's session together. I want to thank our event sponsors today. The county sponsors the whole series for the year. And one of our professional partners, SPIN, is also an event sponsor today. And so we thank both of them for their support of the Cleveland 2030 District. Here's the list of sessions for the year. You see our session here today. The next one up is New Technology for Healthy Buildings. We're partnering with ASHRAE on that one, and so that'll be a great session. And then you see the lineup for the rest of the year. We've got a great lineup. All the sessions are recorded and are posted on our website in case you miss one. And today's session will also be recorded and posted along with the PowerPoint presentation slides. Today's speakers, we have Kathy Sarley, Associate Director of Operations and COO for Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency. We have Michael Peters, CEO and co-founder of Sway Mobility. Michael Beck, Operations Manager with SPIN. Dan Winston, Regional General Manager with SPIN. Ann Tilley, Research and Policy Analyst with Cleveland City Council. And Ashley Shaw, COO and Director of Neighborhood Planning for Ohio City Incorporated. I want to give a shout out. Cleveland 2030 District does a transportation survey every other year. And of course, as luck would have it, 2020 was our year to do an update. We've got the results posted on our website if anyone is interested. And I just wanted to thank all of our participating properties for distributing the survey to employees in their building. This is a commuter transportation survey, so we appreciate the participation, and you can go there to find the results. Just, you know, when I started putting slides together, I took about 5 minutes to look up some headlines, and I'm not going to read through all these, but, you know, as you can see, I think our presentation today is quite timely. Transportation has been in the headlines quite a bit lately. And as a matter of fact, this morning, I just added the bottom one where Land Rover is looking to go electric. So again, I think our session is quite appropriate today for all of the innovations and advancements going on in the transportation field. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers right here at the beginning so that we don't have to go back and forth sharing our screens too many times. But before I do that, pardon me, I do want to mention that we'll take questions after each speaker. Put your questions in the chat feature, and Cleveland 2030 District Program Manager Isabella McKnight is with us today, and she'll be monitoring those. We will be sending out a CEU sign-in sheet after the session for continuing education credits. Pardon me. And we're going to send out a very, very short, literally like a 2-question survey at the end of the session so that you can tell us how we did and give us some ideas for upcoming sessions. So we would appreciate you filling that out by close of business today. Okay, let's start our session. Kathleen Sarley. Kathy has more than 28 years of experience in transportation planning and engineering. She's a registered professional engineer in Ohio and is currently serving as Associate Director of Operations and Chief Operating Officer for NOACA. In this role, she manages the activities of the agency's planning, programming, external relations and engagement, finance and operations, and administration divisions. Previously, she was the Director of Planning at NOACA. In that capacity, she oversaw the completion of transportation and environmental projects, programs and studies, and served as the project manager for the Great Lakes Hyperloop feasibility study. Before joining NOACA, she spent 21 years at the Ohio Department of Transportation, where she worked in many different capacities in design, planning, and engineering. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from CSU and a Master's degree in Business Administration from Lake Erie College. Following Kathy, we have Michael Peters. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Cleveland-based SWAY Mobility, where he partners with cities, nonprofits, and real estate developers on electric vehicle car share networks and EV charging. He was previously an investment banker in Chicago, New York, and London until he boomeranged back to hometown of Cleveland in 2013. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago and graduate degree from New York University. He's also a U.S. State Department Exchange Program alumnus and is currently a board member of the Electric Auto Association, Summer on the Cuyahoga, and the NEO local leadership team of USGBC Ohio. Dan and Michael will both be presenting for SPIN. Dan is the regional manager for the East region. He leads SPIN's operations from Tennessee to New England. Since he joined SPIN, his teams have delivered millions of scooter rides to hundreds of thousands of people while meeting all city rules and regulations. He spent his career innovating in transportation, working closely with public transit systems in cities. And outside of work, Dan has served as elected commissioner in his neighborhood in DC. Mike is the operations manager for SPIN for Ohio, providing first last mile transportation options to Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Dayton, and Athens. He's a Northeast Ohio native, a graduate from the University of Akron, and when not working with scooters, he currently enjoys spending time with family in North Royalton. And our final speakers will be Ann Tilley and Ashley Shaw. Ann is a research and policy analyst with the Cleveland City Council. She holds a master's in public administration from CSU. Her major research areas included micromobility, active transportation, and road safety. Ann played a critical role in expanding shared e-scooter and e-bike options in Cleveland and currently co-chairs the Education and Engagement Committee of Cleveland's Vision Zero Task Force. Ann regularly rides her bike and transit as she searches for the best local ice cream, a gal after my own heart. Ashley Shaw is the Chief Operating Officer and Director of Neighborhood Planning for Ohio City Incorporated, a community development corporation serving Cleveland's Ohio City neighborhood. Ashley oversees organizational operations and planning initiatives for the neighborhood, including community engagement, business recruitment, the neighborhood's special improvement district, real estate development, infrastructure improvements, and public space activation. She holds a communications and media studies degree from Ohio University and a master's in urban studies and economic development from Cleveland State University. And I'm sorry, I realized that I did not advance my slides appropriately. So there you have all of our speakers, and I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Kathy. Kathy, can you
Yep, I'm going to share my screen.
Grab control?
There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yep, you're good to go, Kathy.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. This snowy morning. That's one good thing about doing this remotely is we don't have to drive anywhere. So anyways, I'm going to talk about the Hyperloop. I'm going to talk about the feasibility study that we undertook and a little bit about the technology and just some other information. So I'm just going to start with a little bit about NOACA. In case you don't know about us, we are the MPO for the greater Cleveland area with 5 counties, 166 cities, villages, and towns, a 45-member board. We also have a sister agency where we developed the Vibrant Neo 2040 plan, and that was 12 counties and 30-member board. So the Hyperloop is a new mode of transportation that's really will revolutionize travel by connecting people and goods with unprecedented speed, safety, and efficiency. So how we got started on this NOACA, back in February of 2018, we worked with a Hyperloop company called Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, or Hyperloop TT. And we entered into a public-private partnership with them to develop a feasibility study for a route between Cleveland and Chicago. And it was a 50-50 split. So the total cost of the feasibility study was $1.2 million. So they contributed $600,000, and NOACA contributed $600,000 to the study. So a lot of people ask, why Cleveland to Chicago? Why the Great Lakes? Why? I mean, of course, I think why not? But there really are a lot of really good reasons. So I will start with a quick video, which will just give you a little bit of background, and then I'll talk a little bit more about why.
Dreams come easy. Dreams of time travel, cloning woolly mammoths, and colonizing Pluto. Dreams where we zip across the country in tubes at 700 miles an hour, powered by sunlight and magnets.
5 years ago, it was literally just a dream.
The problem is, when the time comes for all those dreams to get made, the dreamers don't know where to go. To build dreams, you go to cities unafraid of work and people known for making things. Big things like aviation and smaller things like tanks.
The kind of talent that we have at our disposal here is amazing.
I have been in transportation and infrastructure for over 30 years.
Spent 17 years as a scientist and an executive at NASA.
I'm the chairman of the industry-based led Aerospace and Aviation Council.
I attended Yale University and started a career in aerospace at McDonnell Douglas.
Where do you go to make dreams, to build them with metal and glass in your own 2 hands? You go to cities like Cleveland and Chicago, Pittsburgh and Detroit, places that have had dreams and then made them.
We absolutely have the manufacturing. We have the raw materials.
We do it cost effectively. We have a tremendous amount of work ethic and really, really strong resources.
The Midwest is a place that drops a welding mask over its face and gets to work. And that's why we can't wait to build America's first Hyperloop here.
It is quite amazing to see how many partners Hyperloop Transportation Technology already has with academic institutions, with government institutions, with the private sector.
Flying 700 miles an hour through a tube using magnets and sunlight isn't a dream. It's a we're building this and coming to the Midwest to do it thing. We've already got a prototype thing. Millions in funding to survey it thing. First up, Cleveland to Chicago in under 30 minutes, connecting the makers of muscle and metal and rock and brick and mortar of this country.
You're going to see Hyperloop transition from what is in the past been perhaps a dream of how fast we can go, how can we send people more quickly to different places. It will eventually become a utility.
This is something people will talk about for generations.
When your grandkids are telling you about this new cool Hyperloop train they got to be on, you can say, you know, I was there when they just started.
So let's get to work. This thing can't wait any longer.
Okay, well, I hope you all enjoyed that video. So another really great reason why Cleveland to Chicago is, if you look at the map here, you know, there are the two interstates that go from east to west or west to east, however you want to look at it. I-90 goes between Boston and Seattle, and 80 goes between New York and San Francisco. And as you can see, between Cleveland and Chicago, it becomes one. So all of the traffic moving from East Coast to West Coast has to go on that corridor. So that was a perfect spot to start the first Hyperloop in the United States. And, you know, other good reasons is there's, you know, 14.4 billion worth of goods shipped by truck and air, which equates to 4.3 million tons. There's 30,000 manufacturing jobs, and also in transportation related industries, and a lot of key partners in the Hyperloop construction, which you just saw a little bit, they talked about in the video. Also, you know, we are in the Great Lakes mega region, which is the largest mega region in the United States. Currently, well, 2010 population anyways was a little over 55 million, projected to be over 71 million in 2050. Our GDP is 3.3 trillion, which is 17% of the US GDP. There's 200 million tons of cargo shipped annually. We talked about the largest mega region. And then also there's a Canadian contribution from the Toronto metropolitan area, which adds about 5.5 million people and $258 billion worth of GDP. So I'll just give you a very brief overview of the technology, how it works. So we have, how it works is they're individual capsules that go, they're in a tube, in a vacuum, and it uses electromagnetic propulsion. It's emission free. It's fully enclosed, so there's no interaction with any other traffic. So you know, you don't have to worry about any kind of accidents with that. Also, they're planning on using solar power, which, as you can see from this rendering, they have solar panels on the top of this elevated structure. Now, if the tube was underground, which it can be underground as well, then they would have to, you know, use like solar farms. So the capsule itself is about 30 meters, can hold between 28 and 40 people, depending on the configuration. Top speed is about 760 miles per hour. You know, could get up to 160,000 passengers per day between Cleveland and Chicago when it's, you know, running at full capacity. Also, you know, 4,000 plus cargo shipments daily. As far as the stations, so this is a rendering of a station in Abu Dhabi, where, you know, this Hyperloop TT is working all over the world, trying to develop Hyperloops. And in fact, they are starting to construct the first commercial Hyperloop in Abu Dhabi, as a matter of fact. But anyways, this station could be any shape, but this station is a teardrop shape, and it kind of works like the Sky Ride at Cedar Point. You know, you get on, you go around the ride, and you come back, and you get off, and it goes kind of around a circle, and more passengers get on, and it's kind of this continuous thing. It's kind of like that. The Hyperloop obviously is one way. The tubes are one way. So the Hyperloop will come in, passengers will get off. It'll go through any kind of like servicing or cleaning that might need to be done, and then passengers will get on and they'll go back the other way. So, but again, it can be any shape. This is the shape they determined for Abu Dhabi. And Hyperloop TT, they have a full-scale test track in France. There you can see their vacuum pumps there in that picture. They have the gate valves, which they use if they need to close off the tube for any reason. If they need to vacuum or unvacuum the capsule, I mean the tube. And then there's a picture of the actual capsule. That's the actual capsule that they built. Also, some of the industry advancements. Back in, I want to say 2018, they worked with Munich Re, which is I think the largest insurance company maybe in the world. And they determined that Hyperloop was insurable. They also put together guidelines for design, operation, and certification of any Hyperloop. And then also this was done by USDOT with the Net Council. They developed pathways to the future of transportation, which mainly talks about regulation and rules of the Hyperloop. And interestingly, they determined that Federal Railroad Administration would be the agency that would oversee Hyperloop. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the feasibility study. So we had funding partners, which was obviously NOACA, the Cleveland Foundation, Richard King Mellon Foundation. They were involved because we did extend the route between Cleveland to Pittsburgh as well. So they helped fund that extension, ODOT and Ohio Turnpike. And we had many partners, collaborators. These are just a few here on this screen. We worked with all the MPOs along the corridor. We worked with IDOT, NASA, Team NEO, Federal Highway, just a lot of folks. We had 4 phases in our project. So one of the first things we looked at was the different routes that we could take. So we looked at 3 representative routes. First route we looked at was the straight line route, which is the orange line on this map. And that really, we just were looking at what was the fastest, straightest way we could get between Cleveland and Chicago without any regard to geography or anything like that. And so we really didn't consider that a viable route just simply because it went under Lake Erie, it went under Lake Michigan. There was a lot of right-of-way that would have been needed, and it just wasn't really a viable route. But we just wanted to see, how fast we could go, and that route was fastest. So then we thought, well, as I mentioned earlier, there's the interstates come together between Cleveland and Chicago. So how about we look at the toll roads there and see if we can take advantage of some of the existing right-of-way that the turnpike already has. And so we looked at that, and on a map it looks really straight, but it's actually not that straight. And we found that it was a little bit too curvy to follow it exactly. So then we did have to go off the right-of-way a bit. And so we ended up with that blue line is the toll road route. And then we looked at a hybrid route, which we looked to take advantage of the straightest portions of roadway, straightest portions of railroad corridors, and then we did have to look at some green field as well. And then we also looked at 2 routes between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, excuse me. One of the routes goes through Youngstown, goes to the Pittsburgh airport, and then to downtown Pittsburgh. And then the other route goes through North Lima, straight to Pittsburgh downtown. And then here's just some timetables. So this is looking at the blue route actually that goes from Cleveland to North Lima to Pittsburgh. And so between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, it's about 24 minutes. Between Cleveland and Chicago is about 47 minutes using the toll road option. If we look at the hybrid option, Cleveland to Pittsburgh is about 24 minutes. And then Cleveland to Chicago is about 36 minutes. So it's significantly faster. And then this is looking at the route that goes through Youngstown to the Pittsburgh airport and then to Pittsburgh downtown. So it's much faster between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. It's only 18 minutes. Cleveland to Chicago is 47 on the toll road. For the hybrid option, Cleveland to Pittsburgh, it's the same, 18 minutes. And then Cleveland to Chicago is 36 minutes for that one. So that's a little bit faster. And there are a lot of benefits of building the Hyperloop. Some of the direct benefits, socioeconomic benefits, are increased employment, over 900,000 person years in all sectors. Income is predicted to increase by 47.6 billion. Property value about 75 billion. And there's also some tax benefits for government. So there's a local tax increase about 2 billion, federal income tax about 9.4 billion, property tax about 1.3 billion, for a total of 12.7 billion. So, you know, when you look at the capital costs of building the Hyperloop, which is about 25 billion, something like that. You know, the increased income is, you know, 2 times the project capital cost. The property value increase is 3 times. And the expanded tax base is like 50 to 55% of the project capital cost. So, you know, so there is, it is very beneficial and cost effective. Just a little bit more about the job creation. I mean, it isn't just in construction or just in the Hyperloop operation. There's so many job creation opportunities that can happen in things like, you know, obviously transportation companies, but energy, media, insurance, landowners, you know, entertainment, cargo, ports, data. There's, you know, there's just a lot of opportunities for job creation. We also looked at freight, you know, not only passengers, but also, you know, freight. And so when we were looking at what type of freight, obviously we wouldn't be looking at, you know, bulk freight like gravel or grain or anything like that. We were looking at more of the high yield freight, things like pharmaceuticals or precision instruments or electronics or express cargo or express parcels, I want to say, actually. You know, whenever you're on the freeway, every other truck on the freeway is either Amazon or FedEx or DHL, and actually express trucking is growing at 4 to 5% per year, which is pretty significant. So the Hyperloop is about 10 cents. It costs about 10 cents per ton mile. So compared with air, which is about 4.63, it's very competitive compared to air. Even with truck is 37 cents, so we're still really competitive with that. Now rail is still cheaper, which is about 3 cents. So that's why, you know, things like bulk, you know, gravel, grain, cars, those kind of things are going to still go on rail. And really the Hyperloop isn't really set up to take that kind of cargo anyways. Also, the carbon dioxide emissions will be reduced by 143 million tons over the next 25 years because it's emission free. And as I said, the plan is to use all solar for the electricity. Also, once the feasibility study was in draft form, we also did a peer review to assess the feasibility study and looking at databases, route analysis, operating plans, capital and operating costs, you know, market analysis of the passenger and freight traffic and revenues, and the financial and economic analysis. And we had professors from CSU, University of Illinois, Chicago, Northwest University, and Carnegie Mellon on our panel. And so some next steps, you know, we'll continue to coordinate with USDOT, the Net Council, and project partners. And really the next step in getting this to reality is, you know, we really need to complete the environmental process, which, you know, I I've been trying to get that funded. I have applied for a bunch of grants. I haven't been successful, but I will keep trying. And if you are interested in reading the feasibility study, it is available on our website, NOACA's website. And if you have any further questions that I don't answer here, or you think of later, feel free to contact me at ksarley@mpo.noaca.org. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Kathy,
So I
that
guess
was,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yep, we're going to start taking questions. Type your questions in the chat for Kathy. Isabella's with us today, and she'll be monitoring those. Kathy, that was really great. And before we've got any questions in the chat, I'd like to ask one. You mentioned, you know, there's the ability to take cargo and passengers in the same trip, or would there be dedicated trips for cargo and dedicated trips for passenger?
Well, because they're individual pods, which, you know, like hold probably about 30 people average. So there could be just cargo pods, which wouldn't have any of the seats in or anything like that, and you just fill it with the packages or you know, whatever, and then so they could be in, you know, going on the same tube right behind the passengers, but it would be in a separate pod.
Got it. Okay, Isabella, do we have any questions in the chat?
Not yet. I don't have any. Okay, here's one. Hyperloop is very interesting, but I'm concerned about the equity of the project. How are we making sure this isn't a mode of transportation for just wealthy people?
That's a great question. You know, that was one thing that we were very concerned about and wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And we're still working on the fare structure, but you know, we're kind of looking at commuter rail type cost, but you know, we're also looking at things like you know, maybe first class pods or something like that, and so those people would pay more, and then other people it could be free or very low cost because that kind of offsets the cost. There's also a lot of ways to monetize you know, Hyperloop. I mean, you could have the ability to, you know, advertise. They have these augmented reality windows in there, which I didn't mention, which, you know, so because you're not going to actually have windows, obviously you're in a closed tube. So they have these augmented reality windows, which could be used for advertisement. I mean, there's a lot of things, like you could, you know, ride for free if you agree to commercials, or there's just a lot of ways to do things. But our goal though at NOACA is to make it equitable, and we don't want it to be just for the rich. We want everybody to have access to the Hyperloop.
What happens with more electric vehicle adoption when comparing greenhouse gas emissions 10 to 15 years down the road?
As compared to the Hyperloop, or?
I think so.
I mean, the Hyperloop will be emission free. So I mean, I guess the concern maybe is the electric grid. I mean, that I guess I can't really speak to because I'm not sure. I mean, I think it probably is going to have to be beefed up to handle all electric vehicles and the Hyperloop and all that sort of thing.
What is an optimistic timeline for this project 25, 50 years from now?
Well, I would say optimistic / realistic is probably about 10 years from today. You know, the first part of the route is done with the feasibility study. It is feasible. It is especially economically feasible. And So now, as I talked about, we need to get the environmental done. Things are moving pretty quickly with, USDOT, with Hyperloop regulation. So really the main stopping point is money, as always. So, but I think within 10 years, it could be a reality.
How does this relate to the President's Rail Initiative and Amtrak's recent announcement?
Well, I'm afraid I can't speak to that because I'm not sure what the President's initiative is or what Amtrak just said. But I will say that Amtrak was on our one of our partners in Chicago on that stakeholder group, and so I think I don't think the Hyperloop will take away anything from rail, and it won't take anything away from transit. I think it's all part of the system. So, but I don't know what their specific initiatives were. So sorry about that.
Following up on Annie's question, how is equity being built into the planning process? We know that urban redevelopment in the 70s further segregated many neighborhoods and communities. How is this project being mindful of its impact on and opportunities for the communities it will serve?
Well, I guess we just completed a feasibility study, so we haven't really gotten into the environmental portion of the project, which was where you really look at equity and where the route actually ends up being. And our goal and Hyperloop TT's goal is to not disturb really anyone. We don't want to be like the interstates that cut up neighborhoods, which was, not good. And we don't want to do that. And to be honest with you, most of the route will be underground because that honestly is the cheapest way to build it. So even though I showed that above ground structure, that's unlikely to be in many places. It's going to mostly be underground. So, and we also want to decrease the amount of right-of-way that, new right-of-way that's needed. We want to use existing right-of-way, existing public right-of-way as much as possible. But yeah, that when you get into the environmental phase, that's where you get more into the environmental justice and working through all that. Now, we haven't done that yet, but I mean, that is our goal, is to not disturb anyone and also be very inclusive in, having the input from everyone. We haven't determined yet where stations are going to be. We did have a couple of actual public meetings where everyone was invited and to give their input, and so that's where we're at right now. So I hope that answered your question.
And finally, beyond the Great Lakes mega region, are there other regions working on the same type of work, or is there a national plan? Throughout the country, there are some other feasibility studies that have been done or are being worked on. Some of them are working with other companies. Some are just kind of doing them on their own. But this feasibility study is the first comprehensive and publicly available feasibility study. Other ones have said that it's financially feasible, but they haven't produced any proof of it. So,
Kathy, again, thanks so very much. If we have more questions, we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the very end for general questions, but we do need to move on to our next speaker.
Okay.
Kathy,
right.
Thanks so much. That was great. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to Michael Peters, CEO and co-founder of Sway Mobility. Michael, can I ask you to share your screen and take over?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Really great and fascinating presentation by Kathy on the Hyperloop. And as she mentioned, this falls under the Railroad Administration, which is interesting because, we can kind of think of this as, first of all, an electric vehicle, and second of all, as an evolution of the railroad, which dovetails right into our story today, if I can get my slides to go. There we go. Really starts with the railroad. So when we go back to the late 1800s, this was really some of the first, mass transportation. And interestingly, and I think surprisingly to a lot of people, it was electrified. So here is the Akron, Bedford, and Cleveland Railroad in 1895, and that eventually became First Energy. So these early electric railroads produced excess power because they had to create power for peak demand, and started selling off the excess. And so over time, what was originally an electric railroad became an electric utility. And we see that happen throughout the country, but was really very predominant here in the Midwest. In the lower right, you see the interurban electric railway system radiating out of Cleveland. So it's a pretty expansive system. And so using electricity, you could get on a train and go throughout the region. And at one point, it actually connected to Detroit and Dayton and a bunch of other places. So really kind of the genesis of electric transportation really did start with the railroads. That went on, and starting in the early 1900s, we saw more electric vehicles. So again, surprising to many people. The first one was in 1891. That was in Iowa, actually. But by 1906, the Baker Motor Vehicle Company, which was based here in Cleveland, was the largest producer of electric vehicles. Many of you may know the Baker Electric Building on Euclid Avenue. That was actually a building that the cars were taken overnight to be recharged. By the 1920s, gasoline had started to take over. We talk a lot today about range anxiety, actually less today than we did a couple years ago, but about range anxiety. Well, the first gasoline cars had a lot of range anxiety because there weren't the thousands or hundreds of thousands of gas stations that there are today. And in fact, the early gasoline cars, when you went on a longer trip, you would send gasoline or even kerosene at one point by train to the towns along your route, so it would be there when you got there. So we've faced a lot of these problems in the past. We'll continue to address them as we go forward in the future. But by 1920, because gasoline had predominantly taken over, the electric vehicle was really marketed more as a luxury and as a convenience. The electric starter had only been invented a couple years before 1920, and so at this point, the marketing was really geared towards luxury and convenience. With the advent of gasoline and gas stations, electric vehicles did fall out of favor. The battery technology, frankly, just wasn't keeping pace. And so we went through the Second World War, and that period did not see very much in terms of electric vehicles. But still, going back to 1967, that's when the Electric Auto Association was founded. So we have had a long history, even going back into the 60s. We got a little bit of a bolt with the 1990s federal legislation that led to things like the EV1, which we see there. So many of you may have seen Revenge or the electric auto movies that talk about that. So the EV1 was one of several EVs in the early 90s. Ford had one, Toyota had one, Chrysler had one. It was a minivan, no surprise. They were really experiments, and they were driven by federal incentives and mandates. And so by 1996, they had mostly gone away. Famously, the EV1 was taken back by GM. They were only leased initially. They were taken back. Most of them were crushed. But we're very fortunate here in Cleveland that we have one at the Crawford Auto Aviation Museum. It's one of the very few still in existence. From there, From there, we really go to, it was really 2010, but 2012, we saw the advent of Tesla and cars that were being sold to the public. So we've entered kind of the age of, the second generation of electric vehicles. And today there's about a dozen models that are available here in Northeast Ohio. Many more models in states like California that have bigger incentives for them or mandates for them. But we do have quite a few that are available here and across a pretty wide range of price points. So they're not all $100,000 Teslas. In fact, they're are a number with incentives that are in the 20,000 range. So right now there are incentives on the Chevy Bolt, a car with a 259-mile range. You can get that car for about $25,000 or $26,000 after incentives. So pretty wide range of possibilities. And of course, one of the reasons why this is so important is because transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So in, I think, 2016, it eclipsed electricity generation. And so this is, one of the areas where we really need to put a lot of focus to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that, in fact, is what's happening. And as we transition, what we've seen is that in the last couple of years, global automakers have committed over $300 billion on this transition to EVs. As Cindy said at the beginning, General Motors and most recently Jaguar Land Rover have committed to only producing electric vehicles starting by 2035. GM has said they're investing $27 billion. Ford is putting in $29 billion. Volkswagen Group over $86 billion. So this is, no longer a philosophical exercise as to whether this is going to happen or not. This is happening, and it's a matter of how quickly that transition takes place. Quickly, a lot of people are very familiar with this, but terminology is important when we talk about these things, and sometimes there is some confusion. So there are hybrid electrics. So this is a car without a plug. So this is, most traditionally the Toyota Prius, still has a gasoline motor that creates electricity for the electric motor that drives the wheels. The plug-in hybrid is basically that, but with a plug. So you can recharge the battery from your power source, from your garage or the side of your house or a public charging station. So it gets better overall efficiency because you're supplementing the electricity that's generated by the gasoline engine, which is not super efficient, with the grid. And then finally, battery electric vehicles. Sometimes we just call them EVs, but a lot of times BEVs or battery electric vehicles or all electric vehicles. So no gasoline engine at all. The big advantage here is a drastic reduction in maintenance costs, right? So there's no oil changes, no spark plugs, nothing like that. So you're reducing your maintenance costs by, in some estimations, 60 to 70%, while using electricity as your fuel source, which is also, from the perspective of efficiency of the vehicle, much more efficient too. We're seeing with electricity prices in Northeast Ohio at roughly 12 cents on average per kilowatt hour, it's costing between 3 and 4 cents for that electricity per mile of driving, where gasoline, depending on the gasoline price and the efficiency of the vehicle, is generally between 9 and 12 cents a mile. We get the electricity in the car through a plug. There are a couple different plugs, and so this does lead to some confusion as well. The level one is this is what comes with every EV. You plug it into, again, the side of your house or your garage or wherever you can find a plug. It's great. It works. It's just very slow. It only gives you about 4 miles of range per hour of charging. So if you don't do a lot of driving, like most of us right now are not, you can plug in and overnight, get 40 or 50 miles of range, which is more than what most people drive in a day. So that's sufficient for a lot of people. If you do drive more, or when you're looking at public charging stations, they're mostly this level 2 in the middle, 240 volt. So you're double the volt, double the amps. It's about 4 times faster. So depending on the car, 20 to 25 miles of range per hour of charge. So basically any EV can be recharged overnight, even ones with 250, 350 miles of range. And then the last one is DC fast charge. This is something you would only find in commercial applications, 480 volts. 200 amps typically, so much faster. This is also dispenses with converting from AC to DC. So, interestingly, we put AC into the car itself translates that back into DC, which is what the batteries need and the electric motor needs. The DC fast charge just skips the AC altogether, puts DC current directly into the battery, which is one of the reasons it's much faster. And so for many cars, you can get about 80% of the battery's capacity in 30 to 40 minutes. So this is coming much closer to a gas station experience. And in fact, the next generation of vehicles, and really starting with the Porsche right now, can charge even faster, up to 350 kilowatts, which gives them about 80% of their range in 9 minutes. So that really is much more like a gas station experience. EV chargers are not crazy expensive, but there's certainly a cost involved, depending on what kind they are, and the DC fast chargers being considerably more expensive than level 2 just because of the infrastructure that's required. But there are funding sources. So recently, both Shaker Heights and Lakewood have received grants from NOPAC to put in electric car charging stations in those cities. NOACA has a program that's kicking off fairly soon, and so that is going to be funding $3 million of charging around the region in the service area for NOACA. The Ohio EPA has announced 3 rounds of grants for EV charging. The first round was completed in 2020. That was for level 2 charging. It'll also be around $3 million. And we're expecting that announcement for what actually got awarded in the next week or two, is what we've been told. And the second round will be announced sometime this year. So we'll see that second round, which will probably be about another $3 million. Some of the utilities in the state have also done charging rebates. AEP Ohio did a first round of just over $10 million. They've gone back to the PUCO, the Public Utilities Commission, to ask for a second round. Dayton Power and Light is doing something similar. Duke in Cincinnati is doing something similar. And we're hopeful that First Energy will do something along those lines as well. And then, of course, there's private investment. So Electrify America is one of the bigger national ones, certainly along with Tesla, but Electrify America, which is investing about $2 billion across the country. Several of the Ohio Turnpike service areas have Electrify America charging stations, right? The Turnpike, kind of a great place for a DC fast charger. And then EVgo is another big national network. A lot of the Walmarts around town have EVgo charging. So we are seeing that, as well as some private businesses and individuals doing it as well. The state is getting involved. So there's a couple pieces of legislation in front of either the House or Senate. One is SB 257, which would provide a sales tax credit for EVs or EV charging. This is something that there's a lot of stakeholders around the state that are working on, along with the sponsors, and interests like Lordstown Motors is backing this measure. So we're hoping to see some progress on that. 2 bills in the state, one really looking at kind of coordinating EV infrastructure around the state, and the other one reducing the EV fee. One of the setbacks we've had as a state has been that in 2019, the legislature, or through the transportation budget, put in a fee on EVs. So one of the ways that our roads are maintained is through the gasoline tax, and because obviously EVs don't use gasoline, we expect a reduction in that over time, and so this was meant to replace that. Problem is that the $200 for EVs is much, much more than the typical person pays in gasoline tax in a year. So it's punitive, which is not helpful as we're trying to get more people to adopt EVs for not only the efficiency but the environmental reasons. And so there is a movement to try to cut that in half. EV drivers are more than happy to pay their fair share for road maintenance. They just want it to be fair. And this is also an equity issue because gasoline tax is paid, a little bit every time you go to the gas station, as opposed to an upfront $200 fee once a year with your registration. So we do feel that this has impacted adoption of EVs, especially among low and moderate income residents. Globally, there's a lot going on. London has kind of led the way by creating an ultra low emission zone in the middle of the city. So you can't drive a diesel or a kind of a gas guzzler into the middle of the city. Copenhagen has prohibited diesel cars in their central city. Volvo announced that everything they were doing was going to be electrified. And as we see, there's a couple big milestones. 2025, a number of cities and countries are phasing out the sale of new gasoline cars. So ICE is internal combustion engine cars, so gasoline and diesel. So you can still have those cars in those countries. You just won't be able to buy a new one. And we're seeing that that is happening more and more. So by 2035, that will be the case in California and Massachusetts. We're expecting more states to adopt that as well. So I think realistically, by 2035, we're going to see a pretty significant change. So let's talk about some of the other things that we expect to see, probably by 2035. So one of those is really on range. So that first generation of EVs had a pretty small range, generally less than 100 miles, which did result in what many people have termed range anxiety, right? So people got freaked out that they only had 80 miles, even though their daily commute is 20 or 30 miles. So again, you know, an 80-mile range EV, probably perfectly acceptable for most people's commutes. And the great thing is that that first generation of EVs, so particularly the first generation of the Nissan Leaf, are super affordable used. So you can find these cars for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 used. They're really a great deal. So as a daily commuter, they're great. Chevy Spark, kind of the same thing. But what we've seen with all this second generation of EVs, so certainly the Teslas, the Chevy Bolt, so not to be confused with the Volt, which is with a V, which was a hybrid and is no longer made, but the Bolt with a B, which has a 259-mile range, and pretty much everything coming out now has 200 miles or more of range. So we've really addressed that range anxiety issue. And, you know, I think between that and DC fast chargers, you can road trip in an EV just like you would in a gasoline car. The next thing that's really happening is automation. And so we see on the right, the Society of Automotive Engineers has a rating system for autonomous driving. You know, it's pretty clear cut. And so, you know, everyone's goal is level 5, which is fully autonomous driving. We're really not there yet. Where we are is levels 2 and 3. So level 2 is really when you think about you know, cars with adaptive cruise control and lane departure warning, things like that. That's basically level 2. The Cadillac Super Cruise is really level 3. It has a higher level of automation. You can't take your hands off the wheel. It will keep you in the lane. It will keep you centered. And Tesla is also level 3, kind of really inching towards level 4. But you know, so the Tesla can change lanes by itself on the highway, starting from the on-ramp. It can basically drive itself to the off-ramp following its in-car navigation system. And what you see on the bottom where it says upcoming, which is auto steer on city streets, that's really kind of where we're hitting level 4. So we're getting close. We're not quite there yet. A lot of people a couple of years ago thought that by 2020, 2021, we would reach level 5. We have not, and we're a little ways away. But there's a lot of testing being done. A lot of companies doing testing. Here we see just recently, you know, the 6th company just got approved to do fully driverless cars in California. So, you know, don't even need a safety driver on board, which is, I think, frightening to a lot of people. But, you know, the systems are pretty incredible. And when you think about human error and the cause of crashes, and we're going to talk about that in a later presentation this morning, it's really kind of interesting. But even more interesting, well, maybe not more interesting, but also interesting is that 60 companies in California have an active permit to test autonomous vehicles. So really tons of investment in this space, a lot of brain power going into it. So we will get there, but it's not happening this year or next year. We're still definitely a couple years away from that. But I wanted to end by just talking a little bit about the mobility systems themselves. Here we see this is an autonomous shuttle. So these are generally 6 to 10 person shuttles. Really right now, there are pilots of these on the road. They're low speed, so generally 35 miles or less, but they are being deployed in various places, most closely to us in Columbus. There have been some pilots of these autonomous shuttles. Now they do have a kind of concierge on board, but they do drive themselves along a pre-programmed route, can detect drivers, pedestrians, you know, all that kind of stuff. So they are really driving themselves, but in limited and very controlled environments. And when we think about, you know, at least, you know, for us and the way we think about it at SWAY is that the future of mobility is shared, and we really need to think about a multimodal approach to transportation. You know, we can't rely on everyone having a private vehicle like we've been accustomed to for many years, and, you know, the way that land use planning has made us be dependent on cars for many decades. And so, you know, we will see this change, but we need to create the systems to give people confidence that they're going to get to where they're going and give them a comfortable experience, right? A reason to choose those multiple modes. You know, and so just thinking about how Cleveland 2030 members can participate in this transition to shared mobility, you know, there's some very simple and very inexpensive things, right? Providing bicycle parking at your building, right, is chief among them. right? We want to encourage people to use these alternative methods, but they need, these common courtesies to be able to do that, right? So if they have to, find a pole somewhere on the street to lock their bike to, right, that's not quite the same as having a dedicated place to park, especially a covered place, ideally. Providing transit passes, right? There are, incentives for companies to do this, but there are optional programs. Would certainly love to see, more buildings and employers incorporate this into what they're doing. Providing space for shared bikes and scooters, right? We in the very early days of shared scooters, and our next speakers are going to talk about scooters and bikes, but it was a little bit of a disaster because they were everywhere, right? And so we've gotten past that. And, for the most part, and we know how to do this more effectively, but we do need private landlords to work with these companies and make that happen. And so providing those spaces will be also very beneficial. Doing transportation demand management strategies, with the tenants in your buildings, with your own employees, using, great and free tools like Ohio Commute, which is a NOACA sponsored program, are really great ways, very easy, very low cost ways to do this. And then finally, something that we're spending a lot of time on, is, dedicated bikes and EV car share. So basically having an on-site, vehicle that guests or employees or tenants can use. This is something that we're doing right now with the Paradox Prize. So the Fund for Economic Future had the Paradox Prize, which is really working on innovations around how we get people to work and other places, and thinking more holistically about the transportation system. And so, one of those programs is with the Centers for Families and Children and the RTA, where we have a vehicle there that will be available to the participants in the El Barrio Workforce Training Program. They will also get an RTA pass, and we'll be collecting feedback from them and how they use these different modes of transportation to not only get to training and get to job interviews, but that's different aspects of the social determinants of health, from being able to get to a doctor's appointment to being able to get to and access healthy foods in grocery stores and things like that. So that's a really exciting program. We're just kicking off. A similar program through the Paradox Prize in Elyria with Place to Recover, which is a workforce training and placement program, and the Catholic Charities St. Elizabeth Men's Homeless Shelter. Again, figuring out how to get people to where they need to go and help them, meet their goals. The other program is the City of Oberlin. In March, we'll be kicking off its EV car share program. So there will be 2 electric vehicles available to the residents, businesses in Oberlin, and Oberlin College and Conservatory students and staff. And this will be the first EV car share program in the state, probably in the Midwest. So really, really forward thinking by the City of Oberlin. They're doing this as part of implementing their climate action plan. I'm super excited to follow along on that. And finally, I'll just end by saying, what is really critical is that we start to think about mobility hubs. The Europeans have really been ahead of us in this regard in thinking about ways to make the journey more convenient and comfortable for everyone. And, they've termed this concept of the mobility hub. Again, Columbus in Ohio is kind of leading the way on this and what they're calling smart mobility hubs, which is really, giving people a nexus to access all these different mobility options. So everything from public transit to car share, bike share, scooter share, curb for ride hailing, right? Uber and Lyft. So putting everything together, because on any particular day, a day like today, while lovely with the snow, maybe you don't want to take a scooter, maybe you want to take a car. On a lovely, spring day, you probably want to get on a bike or a scooter. So giving people those options, because that's generally what people respond to. And so thinking about how all these modes can complement one another. And what we see in particular is that public transit, car share, bike share, scooter share, all are very complementary modes. Ride share or ride hailing, a little bit less so, but they're making strides to try to integrate more into those systems. So with that, and here this is a picture from the Netherlands, because the Europeans are definitely kicking our butt in this regard, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Michael, thank you. Great presentation. And I'll remind folks that this is recorded, and the PowerPoint PDF will be posted to our website. So all of that information about how to get funding for EV chargers for our 2030 district buildings will be posted to the website. And of course, you can always reach out to Michael. Isabella, do we have any questions in the chat?
Not at the moment.
Okay, we'll give people 1 minute to put some information in the chat. And Michael, thanks for, you've sort of done my job for me too in your presentation. One of Cleveland 2030 district metrics, of course, is to reduce transportation emissions by 50% by the year 2030. And so you've listed all the things that our buildings can do to accommodate shared mobility that would certainly impact our CO2 emissions and air quality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, that we are seeing, I think particularly a lot of building owners are starting to think about their EV charging strategy. And so that's a very easy way to start down this path. But we really do encourage people to, make those facilities available for alternative modes of commuting.
Yeah, and that grant is coming up. As Michael said, there'll be more information in another couple of weeks, and Cleveland 2030 District will make that information available to all of our participating properties.
So we have a few questions. How do you factor in the cost of replacing the batteries in an EV?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, one of the things has been just about the composition of the batteries themselves and the environmental aspects of that. And so we are making, pretty considerable progress on reducing the amount of rare earth, minerals that go into batteries. Most recently, taking cobalt out of the mix and things like that. But a lot, and Ford, I think, most recently was the one who signed up for this. A lot of the vehicle manufacturers are taking a very progressive stance on mining safety and mining regulation for this, but we recognize, that there are some issues around that, and so there's been a lot of funding going into the recyclability of these batteries, and currently the recyclability is pretty high. In fact, we do some of this recycling here in Ohio, down in central Ohio. But the recyclability of the batteries is pretty high. If you do need to replace a battery, which frankly is pretty rare. So every EV sold in the US has an 8-year warranty on the battery. Typically, it varies a little bit by manufacturer, but typically that the battery will retain at least 70% of its capacity, which is still pretty good, especially when we're starting to think about 300 and 400 mile range vehicles. But if you were to replace it, the most recent cost that we've seen, the only cars that have been on the road long enough to really have this happen in any volume is that first generation Nissan Leaf. The replacement battery for that is $5,500. So not that different than replacing an engine in a car, which again, you shouldn't have to do until at least 8 years, probably more. What we're seeing is that the expectation is that the batteries will last at least 350,000 miles. Tesla is working on a 1 million mile battery. The electric motors are projected to last between 500,000 and 1 million miles. So these, there are very few moving parts in these vehicles. So we don't expect a lot of issues with that, and I'll just end by saying, Nissan did a study, and basically they said that the expected life of a battery is 22 years. So 10 to 12 years in the vehicle itself, and then about another 10 years or another decade in second life uses, which is backup battery storage for hospitals, stadiums, things like that. So we do expect them to last pretty long.
Other than in cities like Columbus, are suburban towns working on shared mobility programs?
Well, so Oberlin, which is, I would even say more rural than suburban, is showing that it can be done. What is really the trick is density. Because for these programs to be economically sustainable, they do need to be used. And so density is a little bit of an issue. And so one of the things that less dense places can do is create a system that has a mix of modes, right? So we might want to have electric vehicle cars share combined with e-bikes and scooters and things like that, so that people can kind of get to the hub where they need to get to that mobility hub. So I think thinking about the whole system is really going to be beneficial for places that have less density.
Great, Michael, thank you so much. We're going to move to our next speaker just so that we have time. But I encourage our speakers to check the chat. If questions come in, if you could answer them through the chat, I'd appreciate it. And let's move to Dan Winston and Mike Beck from SPIN for our next presentation.
Thanks, Cindy. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Great. Mike, are you?
Okay, well, I'll lead this off. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Mike Beck. This is Dan Winston, my Regional General Manager of the East. I'm the Operations Manager here in Cleveland for SPIN. And this is a perfect transition from Michael's presentation. We'll drill down a little further to the micromobility aspect of transportation. Dan, can you go to the next slide, please? So people think scooter, they think a child's toy. But these are so much more than just a plaything. Micromobility has evolved well beyond the traditional scooter and the traditionally people scooting around for fun and games. These have actually become a serious transportation option, especially in dense urban areas like Michael previously mentioned. Next slide. So what is micromobility? Well, we're filling that first last mile transportation gap that we see between, let's say, the bus stop and your home, or maybe filling short trips from the coffee shop to the movie theater. These are trips that may be a little too long to walk, but too short to drive, and that's where micromobility comes in. Okay, next slide. So let's drill down into Cleveland here. We'll start here, and then we'll get a little more broad as we go through the presentation. Go ahead. So here's a few numbers. Now, I want to caveat this. These are numbers that are related to SPIN. Keep in mind that in Cleveland, there have been up to 5 different micromobility options. So take these numbers and you can probably multiply them reliably by 5. And it'll give you kind of the broader perspective of micromobility in Cleveland. So since September 2019, we've seen well over 115,000 rides with 36,000 active users. And again, these are SPIN's numbers, so go ahead and multiply that by 5. I'll let you do the math. But you can see that micromobility is quite popular in Cleveland. Our highest ridership days are Thursday through Sunday. But the thing is that we've been seeing a growth of our Monday through Thursday rides of up to 45% year over year, which is indicative of people using these scooters, not just for joyriding anymore, but actually to get around as a transportation option within Cleveland. And our fastest growing segment that we've seen are our regular commuters. These are commuters that we're guessing, we don't exactly know where they're going, but based on transportation or on trip data, we're guessing they're going from maybe an apartment to their job or seeing regular trips every day, possibly to a coffee shop. Next slide. Oh, and so this is a big old spaghetti map here, but what this is showing the each arc is a start and end trip in the city of Cleveland. You can see where the dense city cores, we get quite a few short trips throughout those, but what we're also seeing is that it's showing, if I would give you a side-by-side comparison of a year ago, we've seen much shorter trips. Now what we're seeing is that people are using scooters. You can see some of these very long cross-city trips. And we believe that people are starting to use these to go, let's say, from the Detroit Shoreway into downtown, which what we believe is replacing those car trips that somebody may drive into downtown to see a game or go to the theater. And so we're seeing these longer, more commuter use space throughout the city. But this is Cleveland. We just wanted to kind of give you a quick snapshot. And Dan's going to go ahead and show you micromobility at a larger scale.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we wanted to ground the conversation in Cleveland, a place we really have had great success and great reception, but also talk a little bit more broadly where we see some of the same trends at a global scale. And as Mike was saying, we'll talk a little bit about spin here, largely because we know most about spin. We have data from spin and specific examples and things, but a lot of this stuff, and I pulled some ones that I know, is true for the industry, which is really changing and evolving in a lot of exciting ways. So first, let me talk about the kind of elephant that's still in the room. Big thing that's happened, has changed our industry dramatically early last year was COVID. And so if we compare like a May 2020 to May 2019, just as Mike was saying, he was seeing in Cleveland, people started to rely on scooters for more than just like quick jaunts around, around the block, have a good time, but actually becoming more of a commuting option or an option that would replace a trip maybe in a bus or in a car or a ride share, because it's socially distant, affordable transportation option. So we actually saw our average trip durations increase to 22 minutes in May, compared to 15 minutes in May 2019. And then, looking at the month of April, it was actually 28 minutes. So like in the heat of the pandemic, if we're trying to kind of go back now to last year, it was something people were really relying on as a lifeline. And as Mike was pointing out, we've seen some changes in ride locations. Here's a snapshot of DC, where in 2019, again, the kind of the normal era, we were seeing an enormous amount of downtown ridership. This is downtown DC, kind of around the White House, the central business district. Tons of activity. You can see these colored spots. Later in 2020, still activity. Things are still happening in downtown. People still live there. It's a busy area, but just much less dense patterns of activity that we saw. So things are changing, and we will see some of these patterns have continued in 2021. We'll see how they sustain or maybe change back this year. Micromobility, as Mike was saying, is really for everybody. It's more than just partiers and tourists. Some of the things that are done, are specific investments in equity. And again, we've had a really interesting experience looking over the past 2 years. We're 19 and 20. We can see how this has become an option that people really rely on, and it's an affordable option. Here's a study done by Kittleson and Associates of Baltimore, where the rides that were beginning in places that were identified by Baltimore as equity zones increased dramatically as we headed into the COVID pandemic, and those patterns have continued. And so it's been great to see both the percentage and actually the number of rides have increased in those areas. I think speaking to the way that micromobility, just because of what it is, lightweight, electric, it's just not as big or complex of a technology as some other technologies. Because of that, it can be more accessible to more people. And also many cities have programs, have requirements that mean that operators like Spin have to offer discounted fares for eligible individuals. And so this has been something that's, for us, has been really meaningful to see how our product can help people really when they need it. People who need help when they need it, we can be there for that use case in a big way. And as a result, we see a lot of different changes in micromobility. It may seem at times, we'll grant that it's a bit random or haphazard, but actually there's a lot of science that goes into where we deploy our vehicles, where our teams drop vehicles every day. In response to what we're seeing from the data. There's like billions and billions of data points that are coming off of all of our vehicles and all of the apps people are using. We'll see again, the natural shock of COVID was a great example of how we changed this. In Washington, D.C., the neighborhoods became much more of a part of our demand as opposed to the downtown National Mall area, which had been traditionally a large source of demand. And this was a huge increase in the number of trips and also the amount of kind of time people were spending on scooters. And we and other operators were able to kind of recognize this pattern and then respond, providing mobility options to people who started to need it in and around the neighborhoods. And I should say, we are big fans of transit and other modes of transportation that spin. We recognize it's one part of a network. But one of the cool things about micromobility, whether it's a bike or it's a scooter or it's the next big thing, is that it can be really responsive to changes that are happening, essentially in real time, day by day, hour by hour even. And so if we're beginning to detect, or we're thinking we're detecting that people are opening the app, in a certain area, but they're not able to find scooters, we can go and put scooters in that area in a way that's a little bit different. You couldn't imagine like laying down a new streetcar line, overnight in response to demand. Now, as we see more micromobility trips happening, perhaps it indicates that there should be a dedicated bus lane or a streetcar line or a new bike path or potentially even a new road or something like that. But micromobility can kind of see out some of the patterns in transportation, providing a lot of data to planners and others as we think about how do we build our cities. And so what we're seeing very broadly is a transportation mode shift. I think this goes right with what Michael was saying. People are ditching their personal cars in favor of modes that are just a little bit more sustainable. We're seeing more average users. People who are riding more frequently. And we've commissioned some surveys that are showing that actually a majority of people who are riding scooters, perhaps they saw one, thought it would be fun, but then later they're saying, I'm actually going to use this scooter. It's a new way to get to a place that I might have hailed a cab to get to, or hopped in my car. And that creates more space for more people. It's more parking for someone who needs to drive, if you can replace a journey with micromobility. And so I want to talk a little bit about the way in which micromobility companies are starting to make subtle changes to our built environment in different cities. I'm just going to flash these up. It's pretty cool because the way that our cities are configured is so important to how people feel about getting around. And it's often just as simple as literally painting a sidewalk or painting up, striping a lane or striping a crosswalk. So in Salt Lake City, we transformed an intersection into kind of this really beautiful art space with a whole bunch of partners in the city. In Denver, we created a really interesting kind of parklit hub using a parking space and transforming it into a place where people could sit. They could chat, relax. They could safely store scooters or other kinds of micromobility. Sort of this multimodal hub that activated a parking space, which had previously just been used for one car some of the time. In New York City, we actually just turned the streets into play spaces. The city had closed down neighborhood streets to cars to provide more space for people to be outdoors and socially distant. And so we just said, hey, let's fill them with different obstacles for kids to play around with and create these kind of joyful spaces. And you start to realize, wow, a lot of the space that we have in our cities is used for one thing, which is getting through the city. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We can turn our spaces into places where people want to be and thrive. In London, again, with the sort of parklet concept, creating shaded garden areas where people can just hang out and again, eat outside at a time when that's something that's really, really important. And so Spin is not the only company that's doing this kind of thing. But what we found in our industry is that as we're thinking about how to get around differently, we found a lot of willing partners who want us to support them and how to use other space differently too in cities. And so very broadly, there are a lot of different ways that cities are starting to work with companies. And so here's just a few that we're familiar with, and there's tons emerging every day. A lot of the transportation headlines are focused on exciting technological changes, but what we find is that this sort of it's like a partnership change or just a reframing of the arrangement between different kinds of mobility companies can create just transformative changes. So in Pittsburgh, there's a coalition of companies called the Pittsburgh Mobility Collective. Spin's a part of that. That's including Spin, Zipcar, Waste, Carpool, that will all be available in one app. So Pittsburgh sort of turned to this collective of companies to integrate a variety of modes together. It's a really exciting first in the world, I think, arrangement with a kind of new mobility as a sector that goes beyond just micromobility. Virginia Tech had a research grant that they got from Ford, which is Spin's parent company. And we deployed a variety of scooters there that had been instrumented specially to collect even more data than is normally collected. And Virginia Tech's publishing a variety of like academic studies using these, these additional data points that their transportation engineers get from having these scooters out. And then in Portland, more simply, the Portland Bureau of Transportation waived fees that it was assessing micromobility providers so that micromobility providers could provide discounted fares, especially during the pandemic. So it's just kind of like, how can we immediately stand up another option that's discounted and accessible for more people by, kind of investing a little bit, reducing sort of the fees that operators have to pay, and is able to provide, again, more service for more people. And these kind of are just 3 examples of some of the new ways that cities are working with companies. And there's just a lot of innovation happening here on every front. And we're just excited to see kind of what's next. But let's now talk about technology. What's coming up next? There's a lot of different things happening. First, this is just really so intuitive. Called Next Generation Sanitation. In DC and Miami, Helbiz is a micromobility company. Actually just clipped hand sanitizer onto handlebars, which I think is just a really brilliant idea to make sure that people can feel very safe and sanitary when they're riding shared vehicles. It's worth saying that service transmission, we know now, is not a major vector for the coronavirus, but it is important to be very clean. We're all thinking differently about cleanliness. And so a lot of companies are actually investing in next generation materials that are antimicrobial for the grips on their sort of next generation scooters that are coming out over the next couple of years. Companies are looking at rider destination. And again, we talked about infrastructure and, striping bike lanes or different crosswalks, integrating the directions with those important features in cities. So in Spin, you can enter where you want to go, and we'll direct you using local infrastructure. Hubs are something that's really important that a number of different companies are looking at, and again, this is related to how can we engage together. We've been working with landlords and with city governments to provide charging stations for micromobility. So Spin scooters, some of these stations are Spin branded. Other infrastructure providers, like Swift Miles, an example, are working with cities or private real estate developers to provide unbranded stations. But our hubs are open for all, and they're really helpful because we can incentivize users to dock their scooters at these hubs, and that means that the scooters are being charged right there, and maybe we'll give a discount to the user to sort of encourage that behavior. A lot of companies are experimenting with alternative fare options. And just as Mike was saying, we're realizing that people are beginning to rely on micromobility. We want them to be able to do that. So Spin, other companies, especially our European colleagues, have started to introduce transit-style passes, whether it's for an hour or it's a day or even for a month, where you can kind of in effect rent the ability to use any kind of scooter you want for the month, and then you can rely on it without having to calculate your fare every day. And so we think about the different kinds of use cases. The person who might be heading into town wants to get around to and from a couple of different restaurants or things like that, versus the person who has come to use a scooter or an electric bicycle that they rent from Jump or something as their way to get around town. That person may want to use a monthly pass, and so a lot of this innovation is going to be introduced over the next year. E-bikes are increasingly part of the story for micromobility operators. They've been around for probably a decade, at scale, and a lot of companies you can buy e-bikes. They're very useful for people who and really quite popular for delivery workers. But micromobility operators are increasingly incorporating them into the network of vehicles that are available for rent. Cities are really excited about e-bikes because they are another part of the network that we've been talking about, starting with the Hyperloop, right down through through personal vehicles, and if scooters are for half mile to 2 miles, e-bikes are great for like 2 to 5 miles, and so they're just filling in and even more of the gap. The kinds of journeys you can take on a electric lightweight vehicle as opposed to a more traditional automobile. And we've piloted this in Washington, D.C. It's focused specifically on delivery workers. Lime, one of our major competitors, purchased Jump bikes from Uber, which was a big news in the industry last year. And so you'll see these sort of branded bikes around in cities around the country. And a number of cities are looking to this multimodal aspect of bikes and scooters for their next generation scooter programs. What's really important and really exciting is how micromobility can be accessible to everybody. It can be low cost, but also can be an option for people who might have different mobility needs. This is something that is going to be a big story in our industry in 2021, and I'm really glad about that. It's really, really important. There's a number of different examples of different modes. You can put a seat on a sort of a traditional scooter. There's a picture of Oakland's mayor, or we can contemplate even more sort of evolved versions, 3-wheeled scooters or 4-wheeled scooters with baskets or other kinds of options, so you can start to carry things that you may need to carry with you. It can be really useful for people who have more of a hard time balancing. We've also looked at attachments for traditional wheelchairs, electric attachments. So you can transform your wheelchair into an electric scooter. And so this is a really exciting area, and we'll see a variety of different ways that these vehicles are made available to people who have these different kinds of mobility needs, including monthly rentals, daily rentals, pickup and delivery, or pick them up at a hub. Pedestrian awareness is a hot topic in all cities, and increasingly companies are turning to technology to solve this. As one example, Spin Insight is something that we've just introduced. We use computer vision to detect bike lanes and sidewalks in real time and actually provide feedback to the users. I've just tried this up in New York City, where we were demoing the technology, and it actually works. There's a new camera mounted on the scooter that detects this looks like a bike lane in real time using AI, and provides a sound that says, get into the bike lane or get off the sidewalk. And in the future, these will be tied to penalties or potentially even exclusions, where we can ban someone from the service if they're just not being a good actor. There's a variety of ways that companies are doing this. Some companies are turning to really advanced GPS or maps of the city built into the scooters. Computer vision has been one solution that we're familiar with. The most exciting one is self-driving vehicles, but not cars, self-driving scooters. So this is really next generation, but it's going to be live this year in Boise, Idaho, where you can hail a scooter that will drive itself to you safely at very, very low speeds. These are 3-wheeled scooters that are remotely operated right now, and they will soon, maybe not too soon, but they will in the future be operated by AI. This is kind of the long-term vision for this. It's a variety of impacts that this has. The first one is, again, you could hail a scooter, but maybe more near at hand, you could think of how we can adjust the position of a scooter so that it's not blocking a sidewalk. If someone just leaves it in the wrong place, we can actually remotely adjust that or configure it in response to a complaint, or even if we see on the camera on the vehicle that it's in the wrong area, we can just move it a couple of feet so that it's parked alongside a bike rack or somewhere that it should be. This is a very, very interesting vehicle that we're excited to roll out and partner with a company called Tortoise, and you'll see a lot of this kind of new innovation throughout the rest of the industry. So I want to bring it all together very briefly to close. There's a lot of things happening, but what does it really mean for the places where we live, in our communities? So first, these services are really accessible, and we can rapidly find ways to make sure that they're accessible to more people, and that make sure that we're supporting the people who really need options in this time. So many micromobility firms have been offering programs for essential workers in the pandemic. And in 2021, a lot of operators have continued this for workers who rely on different means of transportation and need that to get around. And so cities are looking to companies to provide discounts for example, for restaurant workers or healthcare workers. And companies that we've seen are glad to do that, to step up to provide more of an option for people who just need to get around. And providing micromobility as an option, or encouraging that as the transportation, has good impacts for the rest of the city. It helps reduce traffic and reduce emissions, which is really one of the things that we're most excited about with micromobility. So as a company, we've committed to being carbon negative by 2025, using electric vehicles to support our fleets. But just very broadly, micromobility vehicles are sustainable because they're lightweight and they're electric. And so they have less of an energy impact than other modes of transportation, just because they just don't require as much power, even when that power is electric. We are really proud of our economic development impact. And I mention this because I think the received wisdom about the scooter industry is that it's a lot of gig workers or independent contractors. Industry increasingly is not gig workers. We were proud at Spin to pioneer a model of just old-fashioned W-2 workers who are on our team getting benefits. And the industry is evolving in this direction because we realize that to do mobility right, you need to have a team you can trust. It's trained and can respond very rapidly to concerns that may emerge. So it has a big impact of actually creating jobs with this new technology, and not just kind of trying to manage the system from HQ somewhere on well away from the city that we're serving. Very broadly, what we think mobility enables is just safe and healthy cities that are built for people. When we're talking about small vehicles that are lightweight, that are electric, that anybody can access no matter what their needs are, we're talking about places that are easy to get around where anybody can thrive. And I think as we think about how our communities are going to need to evolve in the face of all the challenges that we have in the 21st century, micromobility is a really kind of like lightweight option that can be rolled out quickly and that can point the way towards more permanent investments that may be needed to support the growth of our great cities and communities. So thanks so much for listening. I guess I stopped sharing because I wanted to see everybody's face. We hope that's useful. We'd love to take any questions about Cleveland or about anything else.
Dan and Mike, thanks so very much. That was a great presentation. And I will add that SPIN is a Cleveland 2030 district partner, and they are offering scooter hubs to our 2030 district participating properties. So our member properties have the option of installing those hubs. And I'm sure anybody that's interested can contact me and I can connect you to Mike and Dan for that. But let's take one question because I just want to make sure that we have time for Ann and Ashley. And then Mike and Dan, please monitor the chat. If there's other questions that come in, maybe you can answer through the chat. Isabella?
So we did have one. What's the average age of riders in Cleveland?
I'll tell you that, Mike, I'll kick it to you. One thing is that we don't collect that kind of data. We do verify that everybody's above 18, but we don't collect demographic data about our riders except as part of like specific surveys that we haven't done and undone in Cleveland. We do that in partnership with companies, and we're very, very concerned about people's privacy. And so we verify their identity, their ID rather, to make sure that they are not underage. That's our most important concern, is safety. And then, beyond that, we're open to everybody and we actually don't monitor that.
Great. Thanks, guys. Again, please monitor the chat. If other questions come in, maybe you can answer through the chat. And hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end for open discussion. But I would like to turn it over to Ann Tilley and Ashley Shaw now. They're representing Vision Zero, and let them take it away. Alrighty.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Shaw. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Director of Neighborhood Planning for Ohio City Incorporated. I've also been a member of the City of Cleveland's Vision Zero Task Force for about 3 years since it was created, and I co-chair the Enforcement Committee for Vision Zero. And you can go to the next slide. So I came to this work professionally as a planner. I've been working in transportation safety for over 10 years, but this work got a lot more personal for me about 3.5 years ago. I didn't own a car for about 10 years, and I mainly walked, biked, and took public transportation to get around. I was involved in a crash about a block from my house. A distracted driver turned into me and caused me to sustain a subdural hematoma, which is a brain bleed. It completely changed my life. As you can imagine, your brain impacts every element of your body and what you can do. And so when you injure it, I experienced cognitive issues like being delayed, noticeably delayed when I spoke, not being able to find words for what I wanted to say, short-term memory loss. I was confused, physical issues like migraines, fatigue, nausea, sensitivity to sound, and then mental issues as well. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder after that, and I think the best way to describe it, my neurologist described it to me once, is your brain releasing, not knowing it is safe, following the dangerous situation, which for me was the brain injury and the bike crash. And so your brain continues to release those hormones as if you're in danger. So for about 1.5 years, as my doctor described it to me, it felt like my body was reacting as if I was being chased by a bear. So I was exhausted, as if I was like running, couldn't eat, scared. And so it really impacted every level of my life. And it's been about 3.5 years. I'm still recovering, although feeling much better than I was the first couple of years. And so obviously when I think about transportation safety, it means something different to me now. Every single life that's lost is a life. Every single person that's seriously injured in a traffic crash, even if their injuries are invisible like mine, it can impact their lives for the rest of their lives. A lot of people that I know who have brain injuries lost their jobs, lost their homes, their ability to work. Some have lost their kids. And so, you know, this is why we do this work, because it's really important to make sure that traffic crashes are preventable and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent them. And you can go to the next slide. So the Vision Zero Data Committee has been processing, they spent months processing about 8 years of crash reports in the city of Cleveland to get a better understanding of where and how traffic crashes were occurring in Cleveland. And they put together this high injury network map, which you can see here. The black lines are the corridors where most of the traffic crashes in the city of Cleveland are occurring. Almost 35% of all fatal and serious injuries from traffic crashes occurred on just 7 streets in the city of Cleveland. We then looked even closer at each of those corridors to understand where on those corridors the crashes were occurring. And so you see the red lines are the hot spots, or the areas that the majority of those crashes are occurring on those corridors. And one important thing to note, if you look at this map, most of the high injury network in Cleveland, those corridors run through neighborhoods that are low income and that are majority minority. If you look at high injury maps across the country, you will see the same trends nationally, that a lot of our traffic crashes are occurring in low income neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are mostly Black or Latino. And again, that to reiterate my personal experience of, you know, struggling to work for 2 years, being afraid I might lose my job. If you think about somebody who, you know, has to show up every day and isn't working on a computer, or has to clock in or be on their feet every day, it could be very difficult to sustain your job and your employment when you have a serious injury following a traffic crash. And so now that we have an understanding of the inequities that do exist in Cleveland with our traffic safety, we use this data to, we use this initiative that's a global initiative, and you can go to the next slide, called Vision Zero. So Vision Zero started in Sweden. It is the idea that traffic crashes are preventable, and cities that adopt this Vision Zero approach are working towards achieving zero serious injuries and traffic fatalities. And so this is done in a handful of ways. It takes a different approach to traffic safety, and it uses the data that we've collected in our high injury map to look at how we can make immediate changes to reduce these traffic crashes, the serious traffic crashes. And if you look at our high injury map, we can make some immediate changes that have a high impact on reducing those crashes. In other cities that are a little bit further ahead of us, they've done, immediately looked at reducing speeds, especially on the high injury network, reducing right turn on red, and implementing at intersections where there are a lot of people walking something called a leading pedestrian interval, which means that the crosswalk signals for a pedestrian to walk before the light turns green, so that the person is already in the intersection and more visible and has more time to cross the street before the vehicle gets the green light to enter the intersection. So just looking at those three major changes, minor expenses to make those changes, cities have been able to reduce their fatalities and serious injuries by 50%. And so the data that we've collected so far is really helpful in us understanding where we need to prioritize those immediate changes to start making drastic reductions in our traffic crashes immediately. And you can go to the next slide. And so this is the approach that Vision Zero takes. They look at multiple approaches at once to look at reducing those crashes. So safe streets, looking at redesigning the streets to make them safer for all users, whether you're walking, biking, using a wheelchair, using a scooter, driving. I touched on some of the things that cities do to redesign the streets to be safer. Speed is a big one. When somebody is walking and they're hit by a car going 40 miles an hour, 1 out of 10 of those people survive. When somebody is hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, 9 out of 10 of those people survive. And so the Vision Zero approach really stresses, reducing speeds in order to save lives. Safe streets is, introducing bike lanes, pedestrian infrastructure, looking at safer intersections, safe people, creating educational campaigns, trying to reduce driving under the influence and distracted driving, which are two major causes in Cleveland for serious crashes, and then safe vehicles. So that can be done by retrofitting existing vehicles. Our Vision Zero group in Cleveland has been working on an initiative to start installing side guards on city vehicles. Side guards panels that go between the wheel wells on large trucks. So it prevents somebody, if they're hit, from falling under the vehicle, which is where most of those fatalities occur. Also looking at educating people on the size of the vehicles that they drive. Another national trend is, while there's been significant investments into traffic safety, making vehicles safer, and that is, looking at the way that we rank safety on vehicles is safety for the people inside of the car, redesigning our streets so that they're safer. We've made all these investments nationally into trying to reduce traffic deaths, and yet they're going up significantly. And this is a national trend. We're seeing this in Cleveland too. So for example, I shared in 2020, there were 74 people killed on the streets in the city of Cleveland. That is a high. Last year in 2019, 56 people were killed. And the past 10-year average from 2010 to 2018, only 37 people were killed. So you can see even in Cleveland, just year by year, how drastically the pedestrian and roadway user deaths are increasing. And a lot of that has to do with larger vehicles. There's a lot more large pickup trucks, large SUVs on the road. If you look at how those cars are designed, they usually have a very large front of the vehicle. And if you think about, a smaller vehicle that was designed 10 years ago, the bumper in the front of the car, if you hit a person, would hit them in the legs and throw them up on the hood of the car, where they have a highly likelihood of surviving. The way vehicles are designed now, with those large fronts of the vehicles, the large grills, they hit somebody in the higher up, like in their vital organs, and they throw them underneath the car. And so you know, that's a big reason why traffic crashes are increasing so significantly recently. In 2020, there was another trend with COVID and people working remotely and less cars on the road. Nationally, speeding increased significantly, and the increased speeds led to traffic deaths across the country, and we saw that in Cleveland as well. That's something that our police officers spent all of 2020 trying to get a handle on, was the tremendous speeds that people were driving on our street once there was not any congestion. And so we look at this from coming at it from different angles to try and address all of these things to try and reduce the traffic crashes that lead to fatalities and serious crashes. And I will turn it over to Anne.
Thanks, Ashley. I do always want to say thank you. We are appreciative to have Ashley on our committee. She's a brilliant mind, but her being willing to share her story is always very important, and we appreciate her doing that. So I know we threw a lot of jargon. Not everyone is as in limbo with transportation verbiage as we are. So, we want to take this back to, what's the future of transportation? I think from our partners, we've seen a lot of great advancements, things coming down the pipeline. I definitely think that's where we're headed, and these are great. But sometimes I think we kind of have to take a step back and go back to the basics. So looking at Vision Zero as a transportation solution, we know that all these technologies of both our vehicles and our streets, those have changed. But for our transportation systems, the outcomes haven't changed. We still want our transportation systems to be safe. We want them to be equitable, and we want them to be sustainable. So, kind of keeping that in the back of our mind, we have to adapt to some of these incoming technologies and strategies, but we really want to keep this as our cornerstone, and that's something we really highlight here at Vision Zero. But that doesn't mean that, we're ignoring the technologies. We obviously want to keep a very close eye on those, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, perhaps the things that we think we are leveraging and the things we may not know we're leveraging. So like Ashley said, our vehicles are getting a lot smarter and safer, especially for those inside the vehicle. I typically tend to think about, the automatic braking systems where they're detecting a person and they'll brake for you, or a vehicle that, when you start to veer lanes, it'll beep you, kind of remind you, hey, stay in your lane. And then those hands-free capabilities, that try and reduce distracted driving. Those things are great. Those are great tools for drivers. They are obviously not, those are the floor, right? We obviously want people to continue to have safe behaviors and not rely on those systems. But, in terms of looking at safety for all of our other road users, I think we can do a lot with leveraging the data and technology we have access to. I think there's a very, very large push for this open data. So, we can look at traffic patterns and analyze our data and our statistics, our crash data, and really look at our travel patterns. Where are people moving? Who's riding in what lane? Who's riding where? Do we notice that there are a lot of people riding bikes on this road? Maybe we should be planning our infrastructure. We can also use this data and technology to inform our decision making. Where do we need to make these safety improvements? And where do we need to be reaching out to communities that are seeing the most harm? And then, like we highlighted earlier, I think the biggest advantage we have with this data and technology looking at this is identifying those high crash areas and really drilling down into what are the causes. And I would say in the old days, and this was probably 3 years ago with Vision Zero, we were physically looking at the crash reports that were, coming out of a police report, going through saying, okay, well, this crash happened here and this was the cause, plotting it down. Now we can very easily pull that data, run the analysis, and have a response in a minute. But we're also even advancing, we have a member on our task force who represents microtraffic, which is a software that you put the camera on the street, it analyzes the traffic going through, and it can identify what might be dangerous about an intersection. It can identify, what were potential near misses that we really need to be addressing before those crashes happen. So I think, where we're headed is we are going to be able to preempt a lot of these safety concerns. We will be able to make the adjustments before someone loses their life or before someone is seriously injured. So I realize I'm talking very fast. That is just by my nature, so I apologize. But we look at this very broadly as a system. So we're really excited to get our hands on some of this data and technology that really will make marked safety improvements. So in terms of where we headed as a task force, as a committee, this is an initiative led by the city of Cleveland with a bunch of our stakeholders in the community. We have probably 8 big community partners. We work with our CDCs, our community development corporations. And we're really, we've collected the data, we've put together a team, and now we're really ready to move forward with our action plan. And so what we've done, we've hired a consultant from Nelson Nygaard. We're very excited to work with them. They are just experts in the transportation safety field. And we will be creating a data-driven plan to address both the high crash corridors, where our worst crashes are happening, but also creating a safer system for transportation in Cleveland in general. So ultimately, this plan will set a deadline for us to reach 0 traffic fatalities and serious injuries. So, by 20 whatever, we will have 0. So really putting a firm commitment on that, identifying who's responsible, and when things are going to happen. We really want this to be a community-driven process, getting a lot of input from the community. And I can put my email in the chat, so if you want to learn more and connect on this process, please let me know. But as a big picture, this action plan is going to really realign how we prioritize safety, rather than prioritizing level of service, getting cars through as fast as we can. How are we prioritizing our investments so that they're making our systems safer? So, and I also think it's pretty exciting to look at a national level. This is Vision Zero Cleveland's very local, but it does exist in this higher system. I think it's very encouraging to know that, President Biden has a very personal experience with traffic violence, losing members of his family to a traffic crash. And also Secretary Mayor Pete, who has really emphasized this priority on safety as a part of our U.S. Department of Transportation. And this very large movement being led by a great organization called Families for Safe Streets, leading this campaign for 0 traffic deaths and calling on President Biden to create a federal strategy that very much aligns with what we're doing at Vision Zero. So that is what we have. I realize we're running close to time, so I will end this presentation. I don't know if we have any questions, but just thank you for listening.
Anna and Ashley, thanks so much. That was a great presentation. And while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I had one. I know you have so much data. Are there higher incidents of crashes at a certain time of day? Do you have that data by chance?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ashley, I don't know if you wanted to speak, but oh no.
I know from I'll let Ann speak to the data that we've collected through the data committee, but I know our police officers that we work with, they talk a lot about crashes at night and in the early morning, which is correlated to the driving under the influence. And that's a big issue in Cleveland with the fatal crashes that we see here. Is a lot of people are under the influence of something, and it's happening between like 1 in the morning and 5 in the morning.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Ashley's totally right.
You also, one more thing, you also see an increase in the winter after when it starts getting dark before 5 p.m. There'll be an uptick in pedestrian deaths. And we saw that this last year in University Circle, where they lost, I believe they lost 3 pedestrians in University Circle in a really short period of time. And it was tied to lower visibility of people walking once it was getting dark, and they have a lot of people walking leaving work. So you always see every winter another uptick in that early evening with the darker months.
I want to be able to get to any questions we have in the chat. Isabella?
We do not have it yet.
Oh, none, okay. So we have 1 minute. Let's open it up to any questions for any of the speakers. We'll give it 1 minute and then we'll close the session for today. Okay, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Again, thanks to all of our speakers. Great presentations today. We appreciate it. We appreciate our partnership with the City of Cleveland to help put this session on today, but just in general, the City of Cleveland has been a great support to the Cleveland 2030 district. Again, we're going to, we'll have this recorded. It'll be on our website shortly, along with the PowerPoint presentations. Just a reminder, when I send that really short survey out, please do it by close of business, and our CEU credit sign-in sheet will go out right after the session, and please fill that out by the end of the day as well. Thanks again to everyone. Thanks for participating. We hope to see you at future events. Take care, everybody.